Over on Jaguar Eater 7, a new baseball video is out. In this video, we talk about the drama that happened on the 1982 New York Yankees after one pitcher decided to punch a wall. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. In 1976, the Baltimore Colts were a dominant ball club. Under the guidance of head coach Ted Marchibroda, not only did they go 11-3 and win the AFC East title while finishing with the second most wins in all of football, but they had the best offense in the league, scoring 417 points or 29.8 points per game. Part of why was because of the incredible play of the man that you've been watching, quarterback Burt Jones, who was named a Pro Bowler, a first-team All-Pro, the AP Offensive Player of the Year, and the MVP of the league, after he threw for 3,104 yards and 24 touchdowns. When you consider how good the passing game was, as they were first in the league in yards, second in passing touchdowns, and first in yards per attempt, the last thing you would expect the Colts to do in the first round of the ensuing draft in 1977, especially since they lost no one, would be to draft a wide receiver, right? I mean, your defense wasn't anything to write home about, and got decimated by the Pittsburgh Steelers in the divisional round, losing 40-14 thanks to a perfect game by Terry Bradshaw. And you're going to draft a wide receiver with pick number 26? Well, with the way the board was going, and with the fact that their depth at wide receiver was lacking, along with the uncertain contract status of their star wideout Roger Carr, who you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, the selection of a wide receiver in that context makes way more sense. As Marchibroda said, we wanted linebackers and defensive backs, but the best defensive players were gone in the first round. Some offensive linemen were still available, but we thought our biggest need was depth at wide receiver. Regardless, it was a stunning pick, with writers criticizing the pick left, right, and center for not addressing the true needs of the team and for drafting a complete wild card. As one writer said, if you thought the Colts were going to do this and had heard of this man, you're either a pro football scout or a Kentucky fanatic. However, the Colts stunned just about everyone by taking this man right here, Kentucky wideout Randy Burke, with pick number 26. And they even stunned Randy Burke himself, because he was getting ready to join the Seattle Seahawks. Seriously, Burke thought the Seahawks had drafted him, and was royally confused when the Colts came calling, thinking, wait a second, two teams just drafted me. And it led to a bizarre situation and drama and controversy that nearly half a century later deserves a deeper dive for just how insane it truly was. Because this is the story behind the Baltimore Colts selection of Randy Burke, and the bizarre controversy of the 1977 NFL Draft that you probably never heard of. Before I talk about the pick itself and the mass confusion, we need some context to understand just who Randy Burke was, and how he was projected to play. The bad news for Burke coming out of college was that I'm not sure right away how many guys had their eyes on him. In his 3 seasons with Kentucky, he only had 37 receptions for 428 yards and 3 touchdowns. And while he did finish 10th in the SEC in 1976 with 15 receptions, he wasn't exactly wowing anyone. When in your 3 seasons, you compile 12, 10, and 15 catches, no one's exactly turning heads. There's a reason why you're stuck watching highlights of Burke from his time in the NFL, and not from his collegiate days. Granted, Kentucky was a heavy run-oriented team, so they didn't really throw the ball at all, so he was definitely a victim of bad circumstances. Still, no one was looking his way after the 1976 season, and Burke even admitted himself that his pro prospects looked pretty dire. And then came the Senior Bowl. There have been many players to improve their stock tremendously at this All-Star game, and Burke was one of the quintessential examples. Because overnight, he went from an afterthought to one of the top receivers in this class, as he racked up 11 catches for 126 yards, essentially equaling his output from Kentucky. And he did it with a dislocated finger too. As Burke said, The funny thing about it is that during the warm-ups, I dislocated my finger, and I was scared about catching the ball on that finger. But quarterback Tommy Kramer has such a nice touch that it didn't hurt me at all. It's no surprise after that quote why Kramer ended up having a pretty successful career in the NFL too. But as Burke added, I really had my doubts about getting a pro shot, but my outlook has changed completely. A couple of scouts were calling me Raymond Berry with speed. I'm not an Isaac Curtis or a Cliff Branch, but Raiders wideout Fred Biletnikoff isn't fast, and there's a lot of guys like that. I think I have good speed. If they try to play me too tight, I can get around and be a bomb threat. Just like that, Burke's confidence was sky high, and despite his unimpressive production at Kentucky due to the system he was in, he was expected to be one of the top receivers chosen in the class. One scout said that Burke was number 17 on the big board, and was the best wide receiver in the class. Another scout said that even though this wide receiver class was pretty mediocre in the grand scheme of things, that Burke was the 4th best wideout in the class. Either way, Burke was going to be a high draft pick. And sure enough, when the end of the first round rolled along, it was the Baltimore Colts who came calling, and with pick number 26, wanted to make Burke the 2nd wideout off the board behind Stanley Morgan, who went 1 pick before to the New England Patriots. Now keep in mind that Burke did not have an agent, so everything was going directly through him. He could only campaign and promote himself. He didn't have anyone else doing that for him and giving him any inside scoops on where he might wind up and where he could land and where the draft was at. And when the Colts called up on May 3rd, sometime around 1 o'clock Eastern, they made it official. Randy Burke was going to be their pick. He was going to get to continue his career in professional football and live his lifelong dream. There was just one small problem. Whereas most people at first react with excitement, Burke wasn't excited at all. At least, not yet. In fact, he was super confused, because he thought, "What the heck are you talking about? What do you mean you're drafting me? I already got drafted by the Seattle Seahawks." Yeah, that kind of came out of nowhere, didn't it? Turns out, both the Colts and the Seahawks drafted the Kentucky wide receiver. And remember, not only did Burke not have an agent, but this was at a time when the NFL draft, even if there was a centralized meeting spot, was conducted by telephone and was not televised. So there was no way for prospects to actually know who went there or where in the draft everything was. And with that in mind, he thought that the Seahawks drafted him in the 4th round with pick number 87. Burke was at his dorm room in Kentucky, hanging out with his friends, waiting for that phone to ring, and waiting to hear the news of where he was going to play. And sure enough, a caller who identified with the Seattle Seahawks and identified as a coach on the team got Burke's number and called him up to let him know that he was their 4th round pick. On one hand, Burke was happy. He was an NFL player and got drafted. On the other hand, he was extremely disappointed. I mean, how can you not be? You're projected as a 1st round pick, and you go in the 4th round, and you have no idea how that happened. That just cost you thousands upon thousands of dollars, and cost you a ton of roster security, since a 1st round pick is all but assured a roster spot. And 4th round picks, especially back then, were absolutely not. Still, the conversation seemed legit. The coach talked about how excited he was that Burke was still available, and asked whether he had an agent. When Burke said that he didn't, the man said that he would be back in touch in a few days to talk about the contract and finalize everything. Again, Burke was confused about how this was all playing out. Not just the fact that this was way later than he thought, but that the draft was moving pretty quickly. He didn't think they would get to the 4th round for a few more hours, but they must have started early. And since the Bucs pick at number 1 was a formality with a selection of Ricky Bell, everything seemingly moved pretty quickly. So it made some sense. Plus, the Seahawks desperately needed wide receivers. Sure, they had a promising young duo with Steve Largent and Sam McCollum, both of whom were in their early 20s. But not a single other player listed at wide receiver had more than 4 receptions in 1976, so Burke would fit right in. So when he got the call from the Colts, he had no idea what was going on, because he was a member of the Seahawks, was mentally preparing for Seattle, and was getting ready to fly to the Pacific Northwest to start the next chapter of his life. And the Colts, trying to make this call a formality like every other draft call, said, "What the heck are you talking about? We're in the first round, and you play for us. The Seahawks didn't draft you. We did." Turns out, the call was a complete hoax. It was a prank call. Someone got Burke's number, successfully convinced him that he was a coach on the Seahawks, and that he got drafted by the team. And Burke fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And at that point, Burke was overjoyed. Instead of being a 4th-round pick with a 4th-round salary and going to an expansion team that won just 2 games, you're a 1st-round pick with a 1st-round salary. You're going to a playoff team, and you're going to be catching passes from the reigning MVP and arguably the best quarterback in football. Burke was thrilled about this, saying I'm getting drafted by Baltimore. I'm just super glad to be with the Colts. It will be great to play with Burt Jones, because he's definitely one of the best in pro football today. As for the prank call, Burke said, "Phew, I'm so worried about checking that prank call out that when the call came from the Colts, I couldn't believe it at first." But can you imagine if Burke didn't answer the phone because he thought the Colts call was the prank call, or hung up right away, or anything like that, and possibly cost himself a 1st-round pick because of it? Crazy stuff. Absolutely crazy. Talk about being in 2 places at the same time. Which raises the ultimate question. Did this pick pan out? How would Randy Burke play with the Colts? Well, it would not be a good morning in Baltimore, because as it turns out, you can stop the beat pretty easily. Because 3 days into training camp, Burke separated his shoulder and didn't record a single catch that season. He lasted just 4 seasons in the NFL, playing up until 1981 and starting just 3 games, recording 30 catches for 489 yards and 3 touchdowns, with all 3 touchdowns coming in 1980. Now, Burke stayed in pro football for a bit longer after that, bouncing around the Los Angeles Raiders in 1982 and around the original USFL according to his LinkedIn. But he never played another game after the 1981 season, with his career being a massive disappointment in the end. You could make the argument that Randy Burke was one of the biggest busts in the history of the Colts franchise, as although he's definitely not the biggest, seeing as there's a certain quarterback they would draft in 1982 that was one of the biggest flameouts ever, he's definitely up there, and might be number 2. Hurts even more when you realize that just 7 picks later, the New York Jets would draft Wesley Walker. So that was a bit of a whiff at wide receiver. Still, even though Burke's career in the NFL wasn't necessarily the most notable, it deserves to be remembered for this insanely bizarre start, where he thought that he was on the Seahawks, and then, somehow, got chosen by the Colts, leading to mass confusion by everyone involved. Because heading into the 1977 NFL Draft, after his incredible outing at the Senior Bowl and his incredible workouts, it seemed like everyone wanted to get a hold of Randy Burke, including people that didn't even exist. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.